A leaked document from an emergency Privy Council session has just confirmed a major constitutional crisis behind palace gates. Camilla's secret attempt to move massive royal assets offshore has been intercepted and blocked. The illusion of her absolute financial power has just been legally and quietly dismantled by the very system she thought she controlled. Before we break down the leaked files, hit the subscribe button. Palace press teams are already mobilizing to suppress this story, and this broadcast could face a shadow ban or be pulled entirely within the next 24 hours. If you understand corporate or constitutional law, leave a comment below when you spot the legal loophole in the contract we are about to unpack. To understand the gravity of what just happened, you have to look at how the royal apparatus actually operates. The British monarchy is structured like a corporate estate. Every single asset is heavily regulated by the Sovereign Grant Act, which explicitly prevents the reigning monarch or their spouse from treating state-funded properties or historical archives as private bank accounts. For months, financial analysts covering the royal estate have noticed subtle shifts in the palace's internal accounting. But yesterday, the situation escalated from quiet administrative restructuring into a direct confrontation. Recognizing her increasingly fragile position, Camilla attempted to execute an ironclad financial exit strategy. She needed liquid capital and untraceable assets that could survive a transition of power. Let us look at the exact timeline of how this unfolded. Yesterday, May 25th, at exactly 3:45 in the afternoon. The location was the Bow Room at Buckingham Palace. Camilla summoned Sir Clive Alderton, the King's principal private secretary, for an unscheduled meeting. She did not bring up charity, patronages, or public relations schedules. Instead, she placed a 42-page dossier directly on the table. This was a formal deed of provision. The paperwork contained two highly specific, unprecedented demands. First, the permanent administrative transfer of 14 historically significant jewellery pieces from the Royal Collection Trust directly into her private portfolio. These were not everyday accessories. They were highly valuable assets that carry immense historical leverage. Second, the document demanded the immediate authorization of a $15 million financial guarantee. Crucially, this money was not designated for a domestic account within the United Kingdom. The 42-page contract outlined a direct routing of these funds into a newly established anonymous blind trust based in Switzerland. By utilizing a Swiss financial vehicle, the capital would be legally insulated from future royal audits, ensuring her financial independence regardless of who holds the throne next. She expected a swift signature. She operated under the assumption that proximity to the king equated to absolute authority over the institutional treasury. However, Sir Clive Alderton did not reach for his pen to sign the document. He reviewed the paperwork and delivered a response that completely paralyzed her exit strategy. He stated clearly that he was administratively prohibited from processing the request. He calmly explained the new internal mechanism that had been quietly put into place. Following recent financial adjustments within the royal estate, any budget modification, asset transfer, or financial guarantee exceeding a strict $500,000 threshold now requires the direct countersignature of the Duke of Cornwall. The room fell completely silent. The refusal was not an argument. It was a cold, objective statement of legal fact. The king's seal was no longer sufficient to move the money. Sitting in the Bow Room, Camilla was forced to face a devastating reality. She might hold the title of Queen Consort, and she might reside in the palace, but the actual keys to the treasury had already been legally transferred. Prince William had quietly secured absolute control over the institutional purse strings, effectively trapping her inside a system she can no longer manipulate. If you think having a signature denied in the Bow Room was a humiliating defeat, you are looking at the wrong palace. That was merely the prologue to a much larger constitutional maneuver. Camilla's true adversary is not operating out of Buckingham Palace. The real trap was being meticulously set a few miles away at Kensington. and this specific financial strike cost her nearly £500,000 in a single night. At exactly 7:30 on the evening of May 25th, while the Queen Consort was still reeling from the sudden rejection of her offshore trust, the lights in Prince William's private office remained on well past midnight. This was not a standard scheduling meeting or a routine check-in. The Prince of Wales sat down behind closed doors with 3 senior auditors from the Crown Estate Commissioners. Their objective was highly specific: to review the outgoing expenditures of the royal household and strictly enforce the legal boundaries of the Duchy of Cornwall Management Act. For decades, Camilla's extensive private staff, her security details, and her highly proactive public relations team were funded through a continuous, unquestioned flow of royal revenue. She relied on this capital to maintain her global profile. But the moment the transition of power occurred, the billion-dollar Duchy of Cornwall real estate portfolio legally transferred to William. He became the ultimate landlord and the sole financial controller of the heir's estate. That evening, William and his audit team executed a document internally referred to as the Financial Decoupling Memo. This was a targeted administrative strike designed to cut off the resources sustaining Camilla's independent operations. By utilizing his strict veto power under the Management Act, Prince William systematically reviewed and froze a series of pending invoices submitted by Clarence House. The most critical among them was a bill totaling exactly £185,400. This specific invoice was meant to cover Camilla's private security contractors and the expensive retainer fees for her external image consultants. With a single stroke of a pen, William marked the expenses as non-compliant with the Duchy's current financial protocols, permanently blocking the payment from leaving the accounts. The immediate consequence of this financial freeze was swift and devastating. In the modern monarchy, money is the oxygen of public influence, and William had just shut off the primary valve. At exactly 8 o'clock the following morning, 4 of Camilla's senior image assistants and PR strategists received formal emails notifying them of an immediate, unpaid suspension of their contracts. There was no argument, no public scandal, and absolutely no room for negotiation. The funds simply did not exist to keep them on the payroll. By defunding her public relations apparatus, the institution achieved something far more effective than a public reprimand. They effectively silenced her. Camilla has spent the last 20 years relying on a very expensive, highly strategic PR machine to rebuild her reputation and sanitize her public narrative. Without her dedicated team of strategists to curate her image and manage her press coverage, she was left entirely exposed. The institution did not need to strip her of her title or issue a dramatic statement. They simply used objective financial rules to remove the machinery required to maintain her status. She was now a queen consort operating without a voice, entirely dependent on a press office, managed by the very people who were systematically boxing her in. When the budget dries up, the last remaining shield for a queen consort's prestige is the undeniable weight of the diamonds she wears. Visual supremacy can often hide a sudden loss of administrative power. If Camilla could simply step in front of the cameras draped in the most historically significant jewels of the monarchy, the public would never suspect the crisis happening behind closed doors. But she made a critical miscalculation. She forgot that the person guarding the royal vault possesses royal blood by birth, and she operates without a single ounce of compromise. This brings us to this morning, May 26th, at exactly 8:15. Inside the headquarters of the Royal Collection Trust at Street, James's Palace, the quiet morning routine was interrupted by a highly secure, encrypted phone call. Palace sources confirm the conversation lasted exactly 8 minutes. On one end of the line was the director of the Royal Collection, on the other end was Princess Anne. Princess Anne did not call to discuss upcoming gallery exhibitions or routine preservation efforts. Operating in her long-standing role as the ultimate protector of the Crown's historical integrity, she issued an urgent administrative directive, internally designated as RCT 2026 lockdown. To understand how this maneuver works, you have to realize that the royal collection is not a family jewelry box. It is a strictly regulated archive managed by an institutional trust. Using her senior executive privilege within that trust, Princess Anne implemented an immediate and sweeping reclassification protocol. With a single verbal order, every single piece of royal jewelry created before the year 1950 was moved into a highly restricted security category, Tier 1 national assets. This reclassification automatically triggered a non-negotiable security threshold. Under this new protocol, these historical items are strictly prohibited from leaving the country. More importantly, they are placed under an indefinite loan freeze for all members of the family. For any of these pieces to be released from the vault, the request now requires a dual authorization protocol, the signature of the reigning king, alongside the mandatory countersignature of the Prince of Wales. The timing of this lockdown was devastatingly precise. Next week marks the highly anticipated National Celebration Week, an event where the world's media will be focused entirely on the British royal family. Camilla had meticulously planned her visual presentation for the main state banquet, specifically requesting the magnificent Tech Rose tiara. Featuring exactly 2,868 diamonds, it is a towering piece of history designed to command a room and project undeniable authority. It was meant to be her chosen armor for the cameras. But following that 8-minute phone call this morning, her visual strategy was completely dismantled. The Tech Rose tiara was immediately pulled from the preparation schedule and officially sealed inside safe number 4 at the Trust's headquarters. The palace machinery offered no exceptions, no apologies, and no alternative overrides. Without the financial resources to fund her PR team, and now securely locked out of the most significant pieces of the royal collection, Camilla found herself entirely boxed in. The institution had quietly and efficiently grounded her. By simply updating a few lines of security protocol, Princess Anne ensured that the Queen Consort would step into the global spotlight stripped of her historical armor, forced to wear the quiet, unavoidable reality of her new, heavily restricted status within the firm. Would you like to move on to the next segment? So, how exactly does the palace machinery react when the Queen Consort is suddenly cut off from her financial lifeline and securely locked out of the royal vault? They do what the institution has always done best. They hide the problem in plain sight. But the specific method they chose to cover up this internal crisis is perhaps the sharpest blow to her pride yet. Just moments ago, at exactly 10:45 this morning, the Buckingham Palace press office issued official press release number 114 for the year 2026. It was not a grand announcement delivered from a podium. It was a quiet email dispatched directly to the royal press rota, the kind of standard administrative update that easily slips under the radar in the daily news cycle. The entire release consists of 2 incredibly brief, meticulously drafted sentences. It reads, quote, "The Queen Consort will be adjusting her personal schedule throughout the month of June to focus on her independent charitable foundations." End quote. There was no further explanation, no list of specific engagements, just a polite, seemingly harmless scheduling shift. To the casual observer, this looks like standard palace business, but if you understand the mechanics of royal public relations, you know you are looking at a masterclass in institutional whitewashing. Let us break down what this actually means. Next month, the royal calendar is packed with 3 major national events. These are highly visible, historically significant state occasions that require the full presence of the senior royals. By issuing this tiny statement today, the palace has preemptively provided an airtight excuse for her upcoming absence from the global stage. They are quietly pushing her into the shadows, framing her sudden disappearance as a noble dedication to private, independent charity work. The reality is entirely logistical. Without her external public relations strategists to manage her narrative and securely cut off from the Tier 1 national assets in the royal vault, she simply cannot attend these major events. The institution knows that if she steps out looking diminished, Wearing standard jewelry and lacking her usual extensive entourage, the press will immediately notice the downgrade. It would invite speculation, rumors, and unwanted questions about the internal state of the family. So, the press office solved the problem by simply removing her from the board. They used her own charitable endeavors as the perfect, unquestionable alibi to keep her out of the camera's focus. The true brilliance of this maneuver is how it controls public perception. Tomorrow morning, daytime television hosts and royal commentators will likely praise her for her selfless dedication to grassroots causes. The global public will view this step back as a grounded, highly respectable choice. But behind the velvet curtains of the palace, the message is loud and clear to everyone in the inner circle. She is not graciously stepping back to focus on charity. She is being actively grounded. The institution has placed her on a strict administrative hold, restricting her movements and limiting her visibility, all while painting a picture of harmony. She is completely boxed in by a wall of excellent, polite public relations. The grand illusion she spent over 2 decades building the idea that she had finally secured unquestionable, highly visible influence at the pinnacle of the British monarchy has simply evaporated. She has been managed right out of the spotlight, and a 2-line press release was all it took to do it. Do not look at the emotional fallout, and do not look for the drama. If you want to understand how power truly operates at the highest levels of the establishment, you must look strictly at the process. This is exactly how an institution strips an individual of their influence. There are no public confrontations. There are no raised voices in the palace corridors. It only requires a highly specific 3-step administrative sequence, executed with absolute methodical precision. What we are examining is a closed systemic loop. It is a framework designed to neutralize internal ambition, not with anger, but with compliance. Let us break down exactly how this 3-tier mechanism works to effectively box in a queen consort. The first step of this operation is the credit chokehold. This mechanism is instantly triggered the moment private expenses, security bills, or public relations invoices exceed the strict constitutional ceiling that King Charles can personally authorize. Once Camilla submitted financial requests that crossed that definitive threshold, she unintentionally activated a legal failsafe. The immediate consequence is a shift in jurisdiction. The final approval power automatically defaulted to the Duke of Cornwall, Prince William. He did not have to actively seize control of her accounts. The financial architecture of the estate simply handed him the oversight. By strictly enforcing the established accounting rules, all discretionary cash flow was immediately intercepted. Her independent financial lifeline was cleanly cut off. Once the budget is frozen, the system initiates the second layer, heritage reclassification. The trigger for this step was her quiet demand to secure historical items from the royal vault, specifically pieces valued well over the $10 million mark, to bolster her public image. The Royal Collection Trust did not issue a hostile refusal. Instead, they weaponized their own bylaws. They upgraded their internal security protocols and reclassified the requested assets. This brilliant administrative move transformed a simple, traditional borrowing privilege into an exhaustive, virtually impossible legal review process. By wrapping the diamonds in layers of red tape and mandatory compliance checks, the institution ensured that the most valuable visual symbols of the monarchy remained permanently out of her reach. She was not explicitly denied access. She was simply buried in impossible conditions. The third and final tier is protocol isolation. This is the visual and psychological outcome of the trap, and it requires no active effort from the palace to maintain. The trigger is straightforward. Without the budget to retain elite media strategists, and without access to the defining historical tiaras, a senior royal cannot sustain the necessary optics of supremacy. The consequence is an automatic visual downgrade. When Camilla is forced to step into the public eye stripped of her strategic entourage and lacking the heavy jewels that project institutional backing, her status in the visual hierarchy instantly plummets. the global media naturally looks for the undeniable center of gravity. By systematically stripping Camilla of both her financial voice and her historical armor, the institution guarantees that 100% of the global spotlight shifts seamlessly onto Catherine. It is a flawlessly designed loop. The system starves the budget, locks down the historical assets, and allows the natural rules of public perception to handle the rest. Total isolation, achieved entirely through standard protocol. The clock is ticking down to the final seconds. What unfolds behind closed doors over the next 12 hours will permanently alter the structural landscape of the British monarchy. We are looking at the endgame of an extraordinary standoff, and based on the recent movements of senior palace aides, there are currently 3 distinct scenarios on the table for how this crisis will conclude. The first is a worst-case scenario that involves a total, catastrophic breakdown of protocol. Cornered and systematically stripped of her institutional resources, Camilla could choose to retaliate using the only true leverage she has left: highly sensitive information. Analysts fear a situation where she bypasses the British media rotas entirely and leaks King Charles's strictly classified medical dossiers directly to the American press. An exclusive drop to networks like CBS or publications like Vanity Fair would completely shatter the palace's carefully maintained public narrative. This would instantly trigger a constitutional crisis of unprecedented proportions, almost certainly compelling domestic intelligence agencies like MI5 to step in and secure royal communications. It is the nuclear option, and it would leave the firm exposed on a global scale. The second scenario involves a tense, highly conditional compromise. Despite his heavily reduced administrative authority, King Charles could attempt to utilize the absolute last remnants of his sovereign influence. He could theoretically pressure Prince William to authorize a temporary, closely monitored financial lifeline to keep his wife afloat. However, the institution does not give ground without demanding an equal sacrifice. In exchange for this temporary budget, the firm would demand a staggering concession. Camilla would be required to formally step down and legally forfeit the title of Queen Consort. A concession of that magnitude would undo 3 decades of calculated public relations in a single afternoon, trading her historical status for a temporary retirement fund. But if you study how the royal establishment historically handles its internal threats, neither of those outcomes is the most probable. The most realistic scenario is a quiet, meticulously managed exit. At exactly 5 o'clock this afternoon, May 26th, Prince William's office is expected to issue a final, non-negotiable document. Think of it as a definitive withdrawal agreement. The terms presented will be incredibly rigid. Camilla will be required to accept a severely reduced, fixed token allowance of exactly £50,000 a year. Furthermore, she will be expected to quietly and permanently relocate to her private country residence, Raymil. In exchange for her complete compliance and her immediate departure from the public stage, the royal audit team will agree to permanently close their investigation into her attempted offshore Swiss money transfers. It is the ultimate, undeniable administrative trade-off. The very same institutional machinery that once cornered Princess Diana is now quietly waiting for Camilla. The ultimate question is what happens at exactly 5 o'clock today? When that final agreement is placed on the table, will she pick up the pen and sign it, choosing to survive in quiet obscurity? Or will she reject the terms, effectively pressing the self-destruct button on the deepest secrets of the Windsor family? The definitive answer to that question may already be sitting at the bottom of a waste bin inside Buckingham Palace right now. Make sure your notifications are turned on. We will see you for the live breaking update tonight at exactly 8 o'clock.